So we're now going to run through the presentation. So I'll hand over to Stuart Rogers from Muse. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you, Councillor O'Brien. My name's Stuart Rogers. I'm a project director at Muse. We're a 40-year-old business, a placemaker specialising in regenerating mixed-use communities. I've got a personal passion for sustainability, as does the wider business, and we'll go through that later in the slide and presentation. We're absolutely delighted to have formed a joint venture with Bury Council for the regeneration of Prestwich. And I think just a thank you for dialing in tonight, attending last Sunday, and actually all of the interaction and engagement that we've had to date on Prestwich, because for us, having the community shaping ambitions, aspirations, understanding deeper local context and history is actually what is going to make this place really special. So I'll shortly be handing over to the design team, who will run through the initial vision. Councillor O'Brien mentioned it. It is an initial vision, and we want to work with the community to shape it into what will be Prestwich and more detailed plans. What you can see on screen now just starts to shape the timeline that we're in. So spring 2023. So once this initial consultation period is finished, we'll start to then work up a few more detailed designs, and that'll take on board all of the feedback that we've had. In the summer, we'll be back out consulting with all of the community on those detailed designs before we target submitting a planning application for at least the first phase of development in Prestwich in the autumn, with a start on site of early 2025. So we're quite a way away. We are very early in the process, but it's a massive opportunity to engage with the community and actually shape those plans. So if it's okay, just to bob on to the next slide. I just thought it'd be interesting and useful to give a flavour of some of the places that Muse have created. So there's examples of Warrington, Salford, Mackey in Manchester if you've been. So the focus for Muse as a business is creating places and engaging communities. If we pop on to the next one. Cheers, James. This is it for us. So the excitement that we have around Prestwich is creating a truly sustainable village. As a business, we're extremely ambitious with our sustainability aspirations, and we can share beyond this presentation as well. We've done a lot of firsts, first high density, affordable, passive house, extremely sustainable homes on Chapel Street in Salford, the most energy efficient office building in Salford with the largest green wall in Europe. We take it really seriously, and we want to kind of sprinkle some of that magic into Prestwich, but we know there's a really strong community that understand it as well. So we want to engage on those aspirations. If we bob on to the next one. So there's kind of 6 key themes that we run through as an organisation and that we think are important to Prestwich. That is, carbon being important in the sustainable journey and the way that we design buildings and deliver energy, not only in use, but also in their construction. Biodiversity net gain, so greening spaces, bringing the wildlife and the birds and the bees back into the village is quite an exciting thing for us. And I think, the time that we spent delivering Europe's largest green wall that you'll see the panels go on over the next month in Salford is quite exciting for us, but highly important tackling the climate emergency. Kind of key move 3 is eliminating waste and kind of a true circular economy. So every decision that we're making about how will those materials be used at end of life is really, really important so that future generations don't lose out because of the decisions we've made at the early stages. On the next slide. High quality spaces. So for us, sustainability, is also about delivering high quality materials that don't need replacing, but also have a genuine impact on people's health and well-being. So, creating those places that people do meet, connect, engage, community hubs and spaces that actually, draw people out and actually give them a better life as a result of a space that we've created. Delivering social value, this is absolutely huge and paramount, and it'll be front and centre of everything we do, whether that's from engaging with local communities and schools in terms of providing opportunities through the construction, to using local supply chain, will all come as part of the procurement processes that we engage in on the project. And that it will be Prestwich specific, but as a principle, Muse do carry that on all of our schemes, so it's embedded with how we deliver projects. And then addressing wider issues. So, you know, there are a few kind of technical issues that are very specific to Prestwich on water, how it moves about, flooding and the like. So introduction of sustainable drainage through the community are all things that when I pass over to the design team now, they'll start to talk about. But I just wanted to get across, we take it seriously, I take it seriously. I'm working with colleagues within Muse, the design team, the council, and you as the community. We're really, really excited to be involved. So I'm now going to pass over to Lindsay Humbley from Planet and John Crellin from John Matthews Architects. They'll talk you through the initial vision.
Good evening, everybody. My name is, as Stuart said, Lindsay Humbley. I'm an urban designer, landscape architect from Planet, based in Manchester. We're going to start by just taking everybody back to understand our understanding of Prestwich. I'm sure there's lots of people on this call that have got massive historical knowledge of the place and understand the community far better than we do at the moment, but we're trying to absorb all of those comments and feedback as we've been going through this dialogue process. And this is our understanding of the place that's tried to drive the emerging ideas around the vision. So the first thing we do as designers is often we try to look back a little bit and look beyond the red line. So on this plan, you see the wider red line, the sort of the immediate influence of the site that we're talking about in the plan. But we're also looking back at some of the historical layers of Prestwich as a town. So the underlying plan here is from 1910. And there's some clues in trying to understand how the grain of the village used to work with some of those historical routes. Poppythorn Lane, which we know sort of happens through the heart of the scheme, Barrow Lane, Wallace Street, Longfield, all these places that sort of helped to create and define the place at the time that the station was arriving. So at this point, the station has arrived in Prestwich, and it's how the urban grain of the place starts to work, which we come to on the next slides. It starts to understand. Next slide, please. The Prestwich today. So that's looking at the Prestwich of the recent history. So the retreat, Isabella Luckett's sculptural piece that's in the main square, and how that works as a place around adjacent to the Radius building, and where the existing trees are, as well as where the trees aren't at the moment, and where they're beginning to be clues about wider opportunities. Looking at the Longfield and some of the, we see it in so many towns that we work off across the UK, where over the years you end up with a collection of sort of clutter that actually is outlived its life within that place and starts to diminish the quality of the place. So started to look at the quality of the public realm, but then there's clues looking at some of the buildings, some of the uses that are happening, some of the sort of more independent businesses that are prevalent within the village, which is a huge asset to the place and something that the team really want to build on. And then looking at some of the streets, so Gardner Road, and the sort of the grain, the character of the architecture, the brick, the way that there's lots of very strong edges and corner blocks in Prestwich, and tree line routes, which is fantastic to see. And all these streets, a lot of them actually link directly back into the core of the village. Next slide, please. There's some heritage. There's clearly some very strong heritage buildings within the village as well. So we've got the banks, the NatWest, some of the pubs, the Barclays. There's some good bits of architecture that need to sort of become part of that place. The Our Lady of Grace Church is a fantastic opportunity to sort of hold that in within the village plans as well. And I suppose some of the wider conservation areas that we've been talking about. So there's a Poppythorn conservation area, whether that's something that play back in. There's some clues in some of the work that's been done there that John and his team have been beginning to think about in terms of how that ties back into the references of the architecture. But then there's the car park at the moment on Rectory Lane. We see a lot of there's open car parking, which we think is diminishing the quality of the place clearly, and that's sort of cheek and jowl. It doesn't give this sense of arrival at the tram station where you see it here. It's sort of very tight routes. It's not sort of it's diminishing the quality of the space and the sense of arrival into Prestwich. So we've tried to sort of, next slide, please. We've tried to look at this, the high level. So we're in the helicopter sort of looking down back at that red line and started to get a feel of the facilities that are within a 5, 10, 15-minute walking route, which is where we start really. It's about how do we make this place more connected for people to walk, to cycle, to come by scooter, to the multimodal transport, trying to think about the sort of the long-term vision for Prestwich. Is it a place, how do people come to it and leave it and use it as part of the sort of everyday life of somebody using facilities in the village? What was astounding, there are 6 schools within a 10-minute walking distance here. We know that there's a bit of an under provision of some of the sort of the more community sort of facilities within the place, but it's got the Prestwich interchange, it's got the bus stops, it's got great connectivity in terms of getting to it and from it around here. Next slide, please. The transport, it's as I said, it's incredibly well connected. It's got three tram stops along the route, all just about within walking distance, but obviously the main station. But there's also an abundance of existing car parking areas within a very close proximity to the village itself. And we're undertaking surveys at the moment. So we're so early in the stage, we're trying to understand how busy these spaces are, what time of day these car parks are busy, when people are coming and going, just to try and understand these sort of the capacity requirements across the village, to really sort of do a deep dive in our level of understanding of the place and of the village. Next slide, please. We've also been trying to get a much better understanding of the green spaces, and it's green spaces and it's the recreational aspects of those spaces as well, really. So thinking about the sort of the cricket and bowling club to the east, you've got Incredible Edible and the bowling greens to the south. You've got the Drinkwater Park over to the west side of the village, and all these sort of green spaces, they are incredibly close, and they don't perhaps feel as well connected as they could do. And one thing we have noticed is that the village itself, part of the unique character is that it's surrounded by all these rich green spaces, but actually within the core of the village itself, that isn't present. That's sort of diminished over time, and we think that there's clearly some fantastic opportunities to bring that back into the place. There's also the quality of the cycle routes is not great, so that sort of connectivity of getting people to and from it, perhaps from a cycling perspective, is not great. But again, there's been some very early dialogue with TFGM and thinking about Berry New Road, about how does that complement, how can that be part of the solution to get more people, more footfall, more dwell time, more people using the village in different ways. Next slide, please. So that was one of the, from a place perspective, staying at that higher level is just trying to think, well, what some of those unique the character of the place, the wider context, how does that start to influence the Prestwich itself? Are there ways we could get some of that green infrastructure, improve that connectivity back through the core of the village? And this is a very I suppose an abstract diagram, but it's beginning to sort of draw on the wider assets of the place, really, that borrowed landscape and how it can start to influence the village. So that leads on to the next slide, which are where we've identified I suppose some high level opportunities that we see. So we go back here, we've zoomed in a little bit, we've gone back to the red line, and the purple lines here are beginning to tie back in some of those more organic street patterns. They're the much older grain of the town, particularly Poppythorn, that slightly less grid-like form of the old lanes that ran through the village, and how those streets start to then inform the new grain of the place, really, to make it more walkable and more connected. Thinking about the sense of arrival into the town, how do you get to it, how do you get from it, how do you get that sense of wow factor as you're coming into the village, that you realise you're in the village. How do we look at some of the streets like Clayton Street and Poppythorn Lane? How do they connect to the wider community? How do we improve the links possibly to the underpass? It's there, it goes under the tram track, which at the moment the tram is it's a positive to get people there, but it's actually a limiter because people crossing it is not as easy to cross. there are opportunities. We know that there's some flood issues around Prestwich, looking at some of the wider studies that have been done. So are there opportunities to get more sustainable urban drainage back into the plan? And we'll hopefully show you some of those ideas. And as I mentioned before, this idea of cycling and pedestrian and however people get to it, whether it's a mobility scooter or a scooter, it's allowing the opportunities for people to come in and out of the town in a more sustainable way. But we're not looking to take cars out of the town. We're looking to sort of rationalize and see where they could sit within the place, and we'll come on to that as well. But we're trying to make sure this is a place for everybody, and it's a people focused village core. Next slide, please. So this, you may have seen this on these are these sort of high level ambitions for Prestwich, really, and it's I perhaps won't go into describing every one, but what we're trying to capture here is it's about that ambition for the village, and it's about it being a place for everybody, about the strength of its independence, which are there now and can really we think we can grow that to create a more unique, even more unique character to the place. It's about the future environmental aspects that John has already talked about. Stuart has already talked about sustainability and about how we tie those aspects back into the plan. It's about it being community led and building up on all of the strengths of the existing community and building those back into the new. It's about that connectivity, pride in place, and it's perhaps taking it in stages as well. And the ideas start to evolve and the phases start to evolve, and the community can start to drive the ambition. So we've been talking about meanwhile uses, about how do we start things off in this process, and want to get people's feedback into how that could be done in a positive way as well. And that leads us on to the next slide, please, into the sort of these, I suppose, these design principles. So we've got sort of six key design principles, I suppose, that we think are the strengths of that we want to try and bring to Prestwich. So the first one is this idea of a village with a heart. So creating a real strong sense of place. At the moment, whilst the Longfield Centre's there and there's a strong sense of community, we think we can do a lot more. We can make a real, whether it's a village green, a village square, a real core place that people can come to, that becomes a catalyst for that wider regeneration piece. Community facilities, activating ground floors, landmark buildings, all this idea about the village core. The sense of arrival, you saw it on the image before, the sense of arrival from the tram, the arrival from the bus. It's not inspiring as an arrival, but we think that there's a way that we could design a scheme that creates a very distinctive sense of arrival and a wow factor when you come in, using, whether that's in the public realm, whether that's with art, whether that's with lighting, but it's about a sense of openness and welcoming people to the village. Wayfinding, signage, all those things need to come into play there. This idea of a village that reaches out. So back to the thinking beyond the red line. It's about how do we invite people in? How do you create legibility around those streets, networks, the adjacencies that people actually want to walk into the village, stop in the village, have conversations in the village. It's building those ideas, encouraging more modes of sustainable public transport as well, and just welcoming with quality spaces for people that when they are there. So it's a balance of mix of different kinds and scales of spaces and places where activities can start to take place, which I think is on the next slide, please. So this, I mentioned earlier the historic grain. There's a very strong grain in the wider community, but it's how do we tie that together with the village itself starts to sort of knit the wider community back together by picking up on that historical grain. And also picking up on the north-south connections, which have kind of been lost quite significantly. So it's how do we pick up the north-south, the east-west connectivity, and this idea of the animation of these streets and spaces is not just about one village green. It's about a series of spaces that different things can happen at different times of the day, extending a nighttime economy, creating spaces for events, meanwhile uses for play, whether we can introduce and draw play back into the scheme. Again, all things that we want people's ideas to sort of feed into the process. And then this idea of a green and healthy place. So promoting health and well-being, getting people out in using the spaces and embedding themselves in the place, and that idea that there is the wider green context, but actually bringing some of that green back into the village core so people can enjoy it in the space rather than just within the adjacent parks. So stimulating spaces that people want to be in and want to spend time in. Next slide, please. So I think I'm going to pass over to John at this point. I think he's going to pick up on some of the key moves around the emerging master plan. Thank you.